Okay. Okay, good. So today, of course, we follow the schedule, which I updated on Monday or maybe Tuesday, I don't remember. And today, later today, I will update the rest of the, I mean, not this week, but next week. Okay? Okay, so today we are going to finish the examples about the APIs. Okay? So you already tried to do something about APIs, but next week is still about APIs, but in particular API security in the lab. Okay? So doing some checks and make sure that everything that is sent from outside the APIs is valid, at least at the formal level. Okay, if we are expecting an integer, we are getting an integer. If we are expecting a date, the format of the date is correct, and so on. Okay, things like this. And any other case that you might think of. I will publish the text of the lab today. Okay, so by the way, it's more or less the same things that we did last year, if you just are curious and want to know before. And then we will introduce a new topic in this course about browsers and how to handle the design of web applications on the client side. So the content, the layout, and also how to interact with using JavaScript with the browser. Okay? Actually, JavaScript in the browser is topic for next lecture, but we will introduce it today. Okay? We will do a part, we will discuss a part that might be a little bit boring if you already know it. We know it, but I'll try to give you only the relevant points and point out what is really important, especially in terms of the exam, okay, which is always interesting in the course. Okay, so we don't lose, we don't spend too much more time on this, and we just start doing what I promised. Okay, so we're still in week 04, and you remember the application? We developed the index.js defining some APIs. Okay, so post API answer was already there from before. Last lecture, so Monday, we designed the delete API, pretty simple to do. Right? So delete, it's a parametric URL ID with a colon, okay, because Express takes URLs in this format. Okay. And then we also created a more complex API that it's used to vote, in particular upvote or downvote an answer in our imaginary application, questions and answers. Okay? So, and we discussed about which method, which HTTP method we should use, and then also how to handle these things on the server side, where you should get these things and so on. And remember, we also documented everything in the README file. Okay? So, upvote, downvote, the description, an object, we could complete this, okay? An object containing the action to perform, okay? Upvote, downvote, an answer by 1 unit. Okay, these are just specifications I'm inventing right now because there's there was an exercise, but depends how much specific it was. Like for each of common operations are quite general. Okay, it didn't ask anything really specific, like list, create, add, modify. We could add a modify maybe. But the modify just put very similar to the post. Okay, I will publish the modify API later on. Okay, so today we want to focus on something a little bit different. So not just designing the API, but also validating the input coming from outside. Okay, I told you during the lectures there are middlewares that can help us in doing these things. Okay. Because, of course, like here, you see API questions, ID answers, okay? We can test it, by the way, maybe we can run it. Nodemon index, okay. We can test these APIs and you see question 1 answers, okay, the list of answers related to a question. What happens if you write something different? ABC, okay, save, don't forget to save. Well, okay, at least the API doesn't fail. It says the list is empty. I mean, it might be good or not for our application. I cannot tell you really if it's good or not because it depends on a lot of other information, I mean, many other things in the context of your API. Do you want to say something like, I'm expecting a numeric ID? Could be. I don't care since in any case it will be an empty list. It's fine. I'm not expecting to run in this error because in my application I will always send an integer. That might be fine, okay? As long as it doesn't create problems to the server or to the client, more or less it's fine, okay? If you send a string and the application, the server crashes, that's a problem, okay? Because maybe you want to do some operation. Well, typically you don't do operations on IDs, okay? But I mean, in general, if you do an operation that leads to unexpected results in the server, well, in this case, it's mandatory that you do some validation on the server side before performing the operation. It's like the post, okay? The post is a bit more difficult. We have many different fields, like a date, and we want to insert a date in the database. We don't want to insert just a random string, okay? So somebody has to check this information on the server side, okay? So, so in short, let's say IDs typically are, I mean, not so, let's say, dangerous, okay, in our application because typically you use it in where clauses in the SQL, and if you don't find things, typically you do nothing, okay? But you never know, okay? You need to think well about your application. But just for the sake of, let's say, trying to understand how validation works, let's check if this value, if it's an integer or not on the server side, and give a different answer in case it's not an integer, okay? So how can we do this operation? Well, of course, you are able to program in programming languages such as JavaScript, so you can check if the is none or maybe it's none. I don't like it. If parse int, okay, parse int, okay, int, okay, or just, well, parse int, I don't remember what it returns, okay, well, more or less I know, okay, but mdn parse int, so it converts a string to an integer. What happens in case it's not a string, like this case? None. Okay, so I mean the AI was suggesting correctly. I thought it was throwing some exception, but anyway. So if is none, parse int, rec params ID, so we accept the suggestion. Yeah, invalid question ID, okay? Res status, so we can already send an answer without querying the database because we don't like having IDs which are not numeric, okay? 400 is the status code okay? Actually, I should become a little bit more familiar with the status code. HTTP status codes, 400, bad request. Yeah, why not? Okay, 400 for something is typically a bad request. Okay, okay, good. Note here, return. I mean, return because otherwise we need to write else and the rest. Okay, because we cannot then just perform operation on the database and send another status or JSON and so on, because it will be an error. Okay? Because we already set a status. After you set a status and you start with the body, you cannot change the status of the headers in the response anymore. Okay? Just in short, just don't forget to do a return here or put else. So you just do res dot something just once in your in every path of your server code. Okay? So save. Oops, I didn't save actually. Yes, now it's saved. You see Node1 has restarted the server. Just try again. Send request. Okay, we got 400 bad requests. And then if you want, you can return something in the body. The get has the possibility to return something in the body. Okay? So, yeah, my colleague Antonio was in the lab on Tuesday. Said many of you didn't use Morgan as a middleware, okay, for logging. Please use it. Everything I show you during the lecture is typically useful for the exam, for the exercises, for the lab, and so on, because it helps you to debug things in an easier way. Okay, if you have no idea of what requests are actually arriving at your server, well, you are still not able to tell if the problem is on the client side. So in this case, in HTTP, what's the name? The REST client. In the REST client, or is in your server. If you see the line in the logging of your server, you know that the problem is on your server side. Okay, and so on. Okay, good. Let's double check. Just put 1, save, send. Okay, we get back the rest. And if we put 2 is still a number, right? So send, well, empty list. That's fine. I mean, the question number 2 doesn't exist. Again, it's up to you. It's up to the API designer decide what we want to answer when the question doesn't exist. If you think it's appropriate to say the question doesn't exist, that's fine to answer in this way, okay? So maybe not bad request, maybe a not found or whatever else code, but it's up to you to decide. Should I give this information to the client, thinking in terms of the client can be anybody, anywhere in the internet, okay? So think always about in terms of security, okay? Should I give back this information or not? If not, I just say it's empty. It can be a question without answers, so a valid question, or it can be, if I don't say anything, it can be the question doesn't exist. So you don't leak this kind of information to the client. So you should always think in these terms. Of course, these are very, very simple examples. And often you also have authentication and before some APIs, and so if you have authentication and the user is already authenticated, maybe you want to think before answering if the user has the permission to know these things before giving any answer, okay? Of course, if it's formally wrong, you can maybe directly reject the request, okay? It's not so uncommon to have numeric IDs for identifiers in a database, okay? It's not really a big secret, okay? But maybe the format, or maybe the length, or maybe other more detailed information, you may want to think if you want to give this information back to the client or not. Okay, so of course, this is a lot of code, right? The code that we said, it's boring, and it's also, how to say, error-prone, a little bit difficult to write because it's easy to mistype something and so on. Okay, even though we have the AI, right? Let me just check. Yeah, okay. It's recording, and so maybe we would like to use something that is a bit more efficient and a bit less error-prone. Okay, so let's say what we can do. I think we had the slides. Materials was API security, right? So around The validation, no, it's a bit before. Formal data correctness. Okay, the express validator. Okay, let's try to use this express validator. That is also something that you should, I think, try during the lab, next lab. Okay, so it's still about APIs. You finish the APIs and then you review your APIs for security. It's something that we will do for sure at the exam, so it's not wasted time. It's really important that you do it and that we understand this concept. This is a basic course about web applications, but we want you to come out from this course knowing the potential issues that can be on the server and on the client side in terms of security. Okay, and how to address them, how to detect them, and so on. It might be topic for next courses, but in this course, I want you to understand that requests can come from any place, so you should do validation on the server side. Then maybe in a company, in another a more structured place, there will be a framework. The framework does something for you before you write your code and so on. That's possible. That's actually what typically happens in production sites. Okay, so the most common things are checked automatically. Okay, but you still need to write the logic which is important to validate what arrives to your APIs in terms of possibility to access the data and data consistency and synchronization. Okay, so this is the formal data validation, which is the easiest part, but also, let's try to write it and not to forget it. Okay, so you see that in short we can add an array between the URL and the callback of the API, adding functions in short, okay, that can act on some fields in the request and automatically tell us something. Okay, so let's try to use it. So npm install express validator. So it's compatible with Express. It means that we can write something here and it works out of the box with Express. So import express validator, right? What's the name I used? I think I just imported a few things, okay? Well, from express validator, okay? Yeah, the comment, we don't need a comment. Okay, what do we import? Well, we could import everything, but it pollutes a little bit our namespace, so the names that are available in our code. So often, as we will do for React as well later on in the course, we just want to import a few things, the things that are actually needed. So we don't have so many names around in our application that maybe we are not even aware of. So you don't want to use star here, in short, okay? So we need the check and we need the validation result. You see the slide? Validation result, again, is a function that needs to be called to know the result of the validation. Validation result, okay? Now it's grayed out because we didn't use it yet, okay? But we go here and try to change this code, right? So as we did in the slides, okay? Okay, we do a check, right? And the rest just delete it. We delete it after. Check what ID, okay? Check ID if is int with a minimum of 1, okay? That's really the typical check for an ID, okay? We don't have a maximum value, it's fine. Of course, this is an ID. If it's a number that has a meaning, like a number of items in a cart, and we want to have a maximum and so on, of course, you can put a maximum, etc. How do you know that there is a function is, int, min, and so on? But just look at the documentation, okay? Click and look at the documentation. I try to put direct links whenever it's needed. Is int, yeah, it takes something, Okay, a string. Okay, here it's used in a little different way because it's a method. What is the code? It's a method called onCheck. Okay, so the string is already being specified, and it takes an object that can contain keys, min or max. Okay, or even greater than, less than, and so on. Okay. It doesn't have new lines here, so I don't know how to show you. Okay. Unfortunately, documentation sometimes is not so well formatted or well designed. Okay, but I mean, it's just a matter of practicing a little bit. Okay, so isInt is quite simple to use, right? And we will provide you today, okay, with a few examples, and then from this example you can write your validators yourself. Okay, and so now we don't need this part anymore. So the if that we wrote manually. Okay, how does this know that ID is in params? Well, it actually searches for it in params, in body, and in query. Okay, there are three attributes: params, body, query. If you want to check it in a specific place, I think there is another function, check body or check something. Okay, but typically you have a unique name for your parameters, so you should not even care. Okay, because the name is unique, and you just check for the value. Okay, so errors, validation result, that's true, right? Indeed. Oh, most errors, okay. So validation result, I think there is validation result, not here, but so in here, okay. Validation result gives you an error, and the error is Express validator, feed selection, getting started maybe. Okay, adding a validator, handling validation error. Okay, result, validation result. Basically, result is an array. I think somewhere it's written. Okay, you need to search a little bit. Of course, in the beginning it's boring and it's difficult, but then later on, you once you get used to this, it's pretty simple, right? So there is an isEmpty method that we can use. Okay, so if not error is empty, return something. And typically the array of errors is fine, especially in the beginning when you want to debug. Okay. Again, for security purposes, you might want to decide if you want to really give out all this information or not. Okay. 422 is unprocessable entity, right? HTTP 422. Unprocessable content. Okay, good. So, what is better? Is bad request, not found? Up to you. Okay, we don't really care so much about the specific status that you're using. Okay, as long as the first number is correct, right? 2 it means okay. 3 is a temporary error. 4 is not found or cannot do the operation, and 5 is a server error. Okay. Okay, good. So let's see what happens. Not a return again. Okay, return because we don't want to process the rest of the code. Okay. So just try send request. Okay, 2 is an integer. That's fine, right? 1, of course, 1 should work. Save. So it will not trigger anything. But again, ABC. Okay, it's not a number. Send a request. Okay, And now you see the response, 422, errors, an array of errors in the type field as a value ABC, and the message, so what has been detected, it's an invalid value, okay? In location params, so it means on the URL, and the path, that means the name of the field that created the problem, is ID, okay? So this is very, very useful for debugging. It's up to you to decide if it's really needed in your application or not when it becomes a production application, okay? So, in short, we wrote something very useful very quickly, okay? So the pattern is just introduce an array of checks, and then basically this fixed code, just this code that check if there have been errors, and if there have been errors, it decides to return something back to the user that says there has been an error. Okay, and stop the request here with the return. Okay. Okay, good. So that was easy, right? Let's try to do something more difficult, right? Like the post. Okay. The post gets a body. You see, there are 5 fields: body, question ID, score, date, text, respondent. Okay. Again, we can do the same operations, right? Open and close the array, then just format things a little bit better, right? And we do some validations, like, for instance, of course, question ID, if you really want to do the same question ID as we did before, okay, good. Nothing different from before, just the name, right? Here it's question ID, and it's in the body, but we don't really care because check, as I told you, it looks in the params, body, or query, okay? Score, maybe it's a bit more interesting, right? Oh, too much, I guess. Score is int, min 0, max 5. Is this correct? I have no idea, okay? Depends on the specifications. I think we wrote nothing in the specifications, right? Where was it? So the says, yeah, just imagine it's this Q&A example application. So why I decided to write 05? Because it knows that later on in the course we will do 05 because it has access to all my GitHub repositories and so on. And so on. Okay, but I mean, just apart from kidding, okay, I'm expecting an int. Just check if it's an int, positive or negative. We don't really know at this time. It's fine. Date is interesting. Okay. So date. It's a string, right? Is, ISO, and so on. No, I have no idea. I had another idea when I wrote the solutions. So let's check. Is ISO 8. Okay. Check if the string is a valid ISO 8601 date. Okay. What's the format? Can you give an example? Yeah, maybe yes. Okay. So this year, month, date we are looking for. Okay. But also other formats might be valid. Okay. So I'm not really sure I want all these formats. So just to tell you, just be careful about what is suggested by the AI. Okay. Maybe you want to use a different method. For instance, I had isDate. Okay. And again, check the documentation. IsDate, and you can provide a format. Okay, so let's provide a format, right? So an object. Typically, all these methods get an object with some keys. Format, year, month, date. Okay. Then I wrote a strict mode true. I don't remember what it is, but now we check. Strict mode is default for the delimiter is an array of allowed date delimiters and default to slash or dash. Okay, so you cannot just delimit a year, month, date with any character like colon, like dot, and so on. Okay, but I mean, again, it's up to you. I mean, it depends on the specification of the application. And I would say for the exam, since basically you are designing both the client and the server part, so you are both the designer of the client and the APIs, you are more or less free to decide which format you want to use between the server and the client. Okay? Just make sure that the format you use doesn't create any problems in case you receive malicious requests on the server side. Okay? So if you're expecting a date and you're expecting a date because you're using directly that string in the SQL query, it doesn't create problems to the SQL query. So it's more about what the SQL query takes as valid format for a date, okay, rather than actually what kind of data I want to get here in the API. Because then I take it and just copy it, okay? There's no problem with SQL injection because we use the prepare statement, so the question mark and so on, it's passed as data and not as a command, not as a SQL command, but you know, just make sure it doesn't make your SQL query fail, especially in a bad way. It means you are deleting something, you are updating, you are changing something in the database, and this can lead to an inconsistent state, okay? That's what you should check for. You should look for, actually. Okay, so date, and then we add text. I mean, there's probably nothing to check about the text, okay? Don't remember if it suggested something. Well, this string is not empty. Might be. Is it fine to send an empty text? Again, depends on the application specification. May I leave the text empty? Maybe not. I don't know. Okay? Again, respondent. Is it a string? Is it the ID? I have no idea. And at this point in my application, I have no idea. Okay? But just for the sake of practicing, make sure that you try some of these methods. Okay? So, and then before doing all the operations, again, validation result, and if the error is empty, is not empty, return an array of errors. Okay? Save and test. So, post. Okay, that is fine, right? Created. We say the question ID must be an integer, right? Well, this is JSON. This will not work as JSON. Okay? Just to show you. Okay? Bad request, but this fails when you parse the JSON. Okay? On the server side. So it's in the Express.json middleware. And that's a standard response to the Express.json middleware. This shouldn't happen in your application. Okay? It might happen if you get a request from anybody, anywhere from the internet, but you don't care about the answer, right? You only care about the fact that you didn't perform any action on the server in response to that request. And of course, it didn't perform any action because the middleware, the Express.json middleware at a certain point stopped the request and just answered. Actually, it didn't answer in JSON format, it answered in HTML, with some HTML, but we don't really care. Just make sure that when you create a request from your client, it's always in the correct JSON format. But if you serialize the JSON with the JSON stringify method that we saw, it's guaranteed it's correct JSON. Okay? It's because here we are playing manually, right, with the content, so we can make errors. Okay? So, save, send, Errors, field, a value a question ID. It was in the body, not in the params. You remember before I said params, now it's in body, invalid value, okay. It doesn't give you more details, probably by design, okay. Okay, so question ID 1, we try to change the date, right? What can we do with the date? Maybe change the format, right? So, send request, okay. Invalid value in the date, okay. Why it is invalid? Hey, you need to think. You need to, well, actually you don't need to know anything because you already have the answer here, right? But you need to check the code on the server, right? What you did, date, you requested this format. Oh, okay, it's not this format, and so on. Okay, so 2026, score respondent, empty string. Let's try the empty string. Okay, just to make sure it works. Error, field, invalid value, respondent, body, okay. It's always say invalid value, probably by design, right? Because we don't want to leak too much information. Okay, so save, try again, last time, okay? Okay, oh, by the way, I forgot to show you, right? Syntax error unexpected is not valid JSON, a JSON parse, and so on. So basically, it was, I mean, a very long stack trace, but again, it was from the JSON parsing middleware, and you can guess it from here, okay? Okay, and it's inside node modules. If it's inside node modules, it's not your code, right? It's a library. Okay, good. So is there anything else that we can do? There's interesting things. Oh, yes, just one last thing, and then we will continue with the lecture, with the slides and so on. So we implemented the vote, right? So the vote on the server side was a post, ID vote. Again, let's make sure that what we receive in the body is something that check int, okay, it's fine. Check vote, okay, is in, up or down, is in. So you see another interesting function, okay, that might be very useful, is in, okay. If the string is one of the strings contained in an array of allowed values, okay. Where we are, up, down, was it up or down? I don't remember. I delegated it to vote answer. So vote answer was looking for up vote, okay? So actually I wanted up vote, down vote. So the AI has taken this wrong. So we are still useful as a programmers, right? Okay, up vote, down vote, and then we test it. Oh, the validation result, right? It's right, right? Okay, what's all this stuff? Where's the cat? No, I guess, yeah, I suggested a bit too much. Down vote. Vote. Okay, and const doesn't suggest errors. Okay, the user stuff we already wrote. Okay, let's try vote, up vote, down vote. Vote, down vote, 1 is fine. Click. Okay, created 1, fine. Down vote. Okay. Send. Errors, field, down vote, invalid value. It's in the body, it's vote, okay? Again, another validator that might be useful for you, okay? Again, how did I decide to write vote, down vote? It's up to me. Again, I'm designing both the client and the server to establish, define and then implement a protocol. So decide a protocol, okay? And my protocol is I send the body because I don't like to send it here on the URL. It's very simple information. Maybe I could have sent it in the URL, but I mean, in post request is bad. Post have a body just to transmit this information because it might be complex, right? So the information that changes the state, the status in the server, typically sent in the body, okay? And the information, I mean, the URL refers to the resource that must be modified on the server, okay? That's the best practice, okay? Good. Okay, so I think it's all here. Of course, we can complement this code, but I don't want to spend too much time. I will put the solution online with a put as well. I mean, solution, just a proposal for a possible solution, as usual, okay, in any programming assignment. So let me just commit this stuff, so a couple of files, right, that are, so they are already there, I don't forget. So these two, I think, right? Index.mjs, yes. The README and the index.mjs in the correct form. Okay. Example, validation done during lectures. Push, and that's all. Okay. Okay, good. So we finished this part. But again, that's very important, right? It's very important because you have 2 labs on this, and also we will check a lot of these things during the exam, okay? Of course, formal validation, as you saw, is trivial, and the rest will be discussed later during the course because it's typically related to authentication, and authentication is one of the last topics in the course. Okay? Let me help your colleague to connect. Just a minute. Oh, let me pause. Okay, we resume. And so now we are going to discuss a new topic. So new topic is browsers and HTML. Okay, and then a little bit of CSS, which are the basic languages and technologies used in this course to design the layout and the content of your client part of the web application. Okay, so first we need to understand how browser works. Browsers are very, very complex programs nowadays. Okay. And of course we will have more details in next lectures. So now we are focusing on the front-end part and basically on these technologies that we saw 1 week ago, just we mentioned. HTML version 5, that is the latest version, CSS, and the next lectures JavaScript, DOM, events, and so on. Okay? Okay, good. So the browser is basically a window, okay? A program that opens a window. There's a possibility to put a URL, so make a request towards a web server, an initial web server, and then the browser has full control of what is showing to us. And in the browser we have different resources that help to create what we are showing inside the window. So first, the content and the structure. So I want to write something. There must be some strings that say what I want to write. The structure, is there an article, there's a title, there's a body, a subtitle, a note, an image, and somewhere, and so on. There are the presentation issues. I want the font to be serif, sans serif, I want to have it black, red, and so on. And then there is the interaction part that we will develop with JavaScript, and we will focus a lot on this part, of course. JavaScript allows us to catch events and basically user interaction with the page and program behaviors in response to this interaction. You press a button, you attach a function at the page loading time, and this function is executed when the user presses a button. This button might have some meaning, like send the information to the server, check if everything is correct, delete some items, whatever you think of, depending on the application. We attach some code and we learn how to write this code efficiently in complex applications, and then we will do it through this React framework later on in the course. Okay, but in the beginning we do basic JavaScript again, just to understand things. There is a quick introduction to HTML. It's very boring. I mean, HTML is simple. I mean, it's a format which is text-based, and there are a few tags, so surrounded by the less than and greater than sign that we need to know just to write our first HTML page. So, the content of the page is described by HTML in terms of content and structure, and then CSS in terms of presentation, at least in modern browsers, okay? And then there are active elements, like the buttons, the fields in the forms, and so on, that the user can interact with to use the application, the web application, okay? And they will generate events, but we will come back to this on next week. So this is the basic conceptual architecture for a browser on 10,000 feet, probably even more. I mean, that's the user interface, there's the engine inside the browser, a rendering engine that decides how to put these things in the window of the browser. There is a JavaScript interpreter, because we can run the JavaScript code. There is the possibility to use the network, so there is all the networking code, opening sockets, sending a HTTP request over TCP and so on, all these things. I mean, interacting with the operating system, because it's a program running an operating system. There's the user interface backend that interacts with the operating system as well, because you can resize the window of the browser, all these kind of things. And it also has some data persistence, so you can store some bits of information inside the browser. A typical example are the cookies. Modern browser can do much more, but we are not going to see this in the course. But cookies, or this little sort of random strings, are useful because they allow us to keep the information about the session, so when the user authenticates and so on. So they are very important and must be stored in the memory or in the storage private of the browser, private storage of the browser. So quite complex, okay? And this more or less explains why when you install a browser, it takes like 30, 50 megabytes, okay? They contain a lot of code. Okay, we have the browser development tools, at least in desktop browsers. I already showed you these tools in the first lecture, but not only first lecture. And if you open any browser, any window, polito.it, okay, you have something in the menu, tools, web developer, okay, or just click with the right inspect, and you see that you can see the HTML, you can see the network request, you can see the JavaScript code, and so on. Of course, it's not a place where you would like to debug things, especially if the site has not been produced by you. Okay, but in principle, it's possible, right? So let's see yeah, it's all minified because they want to compact stuff, right? Okay. So this is a standard browser again. A standard browser on Windows, Mac, Linux, and this comes together, okay? Unless you really search for some browser without this, okay? Mobile browser typically don't have it because, I mean, it's so inconvenient to work on the mobile phones with the finger basically and do these things, okay? You need a little bit of space and the ability to point things in a quite in a manner that is very precise, okay? And then inside the browser, once the content is loaded, the browser has a representation of this content in the memory that is called document object model. And the good thing is that we will be able to interact with this representation with JavaScript, but next lecture, okay? It's more or less a standardized API, okay? Fortunately, not really completely standard, but I would say today, more or less, major browsers have the same basic functions for DOM, so it's sort of standardized in practice, okay? There is a standard document object model and so on, but the issue is always Do actual program implement it? And the answer is today more or less yes, at least for the important functions. And then there is CSS, which I told you it's for presentation, but we are going to see it better in a few minutes later in the lecture. And then there is JavaScript. JavaScript needs to be loaded somewhere, either written inside the HTML, which is bad practice, just because you are mixing different languages together, right? Like you can write assembler in C code, right? I mean, you can open some brackets or some, I don't know, some macros and write assembler code, but maybe if you keep it into a separate file, it's better for readability, for maintainability, and so on. Okay, so JavaScript has the same sort of problem and issue with the browser, so it needs to be loaded from some files if we are following best practices. So there are some tags, some elements that tells the browser, okay, just load this JavaScript program and execute it inside your execution environment. Note that this execution environment is a sandbox. It means it cannot do many things that can be done actually when you run it like in Node or any other outside program. Because you have taken a resource from the internet, from anybody, and you don't want to access this program to be able to access private information. You don't want to give access to local files or allowing any kind of network connection that can exfiltrate information from the browser to whatever a website that you don't know, and so on. Okay. So it has a lot of restrictions, but I mean there are reasonable restrictions. Okay. Okay. So more or less for the browser, that's all. So let's have a look at the HTML. Okay. No, a little bit boring, but we try to be fast and show some examples as much as we can. Okay. Is it working? I mean, is the yes? Okay, let's stay in the code. Okay, modern HTML. Okay, so an introduction to HTML5, version 5. Why? Well, I looked here 2020, but yeah, it didn't change. Nothing changed that much. Okay, so. Essential features. We don't want to have a course on HTML, which would be quite boring in my opinion. Okay, but I mean just to understand the history of HTML. Okay, just one slide, right? So this guy, Tim Berners-Lee, at the CERN, you know, in Geneva, in Switzerland, at a certain point decided that we need a way to exchange information between computers because I need the information that is on the computer of my colleague here. In another place or the world and so on. So he came up with this idea of having a language where through links, hyperlinks we call them today, you can reference other documents in other computers. Okay? And so basically established the first version of this HTML language. Okay? 1991, so pretty old. And then this specification evolved 2.0, 4, 4 is very important, more or less 2000, and HTML5, okay, from 2015, more or less. This is a living standard in the sense that they are not doing 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, they're just updating the specification, okay? But, I mean, most of the technologies are there already in the basic HTML5. This is not just a question mark, this is unfortunately the icon of the HTML5, so it's not, we don't know what to have it, but in a certain sense it's kind of a joke, right, because it's a living standard. So. And there are, of course, working groups behind the development of the language. So the WA-WG, the Web Hypertext Application Technology Working Group, that is trying to maintain, okay, together with the W3C, a World Wide Web Consortium, the HTML and other standards in this context. Okay? So, why we are seeing HTML5 and non-HTML4 or older version? Because HTML5 is very, very oriented to web applications. Okay? when HTML4 was developed, it was aimed to design web pages. Okay, so the objective was to design the way in which content appears. So basically static pages, 2000, okay, 2000 in terms of years. And so, yeah, of course, there were forms, possibility to insert some information, send it to a server and so on, but I mean, they were not so important at that time. Okay, you could implement and start to implement some web application with the traditional paradigm we discussed before. So basically having a server that does everything, you just send the information, the server creates a new page, sends the page back, and so there is this back and forth between client and server. And so this became more and more common and led to the development of many more websites that were actually web applications, okay? And so this was actually realized by the people developing HTML, and so when developing HTML5, they considered that actually nowadays HTML and all the related technologies are used mostly to develop a web application, as we are doing now today in this course, okay? So the focus is now not just on presenting some static content like a document, but on having good user interaction, okay? The buttons, the forms, so the place where you can write stuff, interaction in terms of what can change in the page, the dynamic behavior of the page, even just on the client side and so on, okay? Good, so HTML is a family of standards, you see how many, right? Okay, so we are basically seeing the HTML and the CSS, and all the rest only when it's needed, okay? But basically that's what we are going to see. Maybe there is the not audio and video. I wanted to see if there is something about JavaScript, but I cannot see it, okay? So this is, yeah, more or less here, but I mean, Node is not really in the browser. So it's a living standard, so how do you know if the browser supports a certain functionality of the standard? Well, you don't really know until you search for it, okay? So there are websites like this, can I use and so on, and they tell you the minimum version where this, for each browser, where this functionality more or less works, it's implemented correctly according to the standard and so on. But just a warning, okay? For what we are doing now, now here in this course, everything works, okay? So basic functionality like running JavaScript or having some buttons clicking, sending some HTTP requests, they are working since many years in any browser, okay? And of course, browser evolve. This has been just updated a few days ago by me before publishing the slide. You see every time, I mean, they release many versions a year, okay? So what is not supported at a certain point might be supported in a newer version. Okay, let's try to sum up this long discussion just with an example, showing you a basic HTML document. Basic HTML document, it's a text file. Okay, it's text. We can read it. Indeed, you see on the left, we can read it. It's a Unicode text file, and it's made of 3 parts. First line, the doc type declaration, which is very simple in HTML5. It used to be like this in older documents because it was XHTML and so on. Anyway. And then there is a tree, okay? A tree of text starting from HTML with 2 children, head and body, and each one can have other children, okay? Strict nesting, it means if you open a tag, you need to close it at a certain point. You see the syntax tag or /tag for closing the tag, okay? It's very, very similar in terms of format to XML. It's actually XML, okay, a form of XML. And text can have attributes. You see an example here, href equal to, okay? and can have content, okay? Also text content, of course, inner text, okay? Because, I mean, remember, HTML started as a way to write some text with some hyperlinks, which are actually this A tag, okay? So, when the browser receives an HTML document, the first thing it does is do parsing. So, basically it means converting this text into a structure in a memory that represents this document. So, a tree structure, okay? So there's this root element, HTML, then head, body, and so on. Okay, everything is converted, also text. Okay, so the most general case is we have a tree that represents any character that is present in the original HTML, including spaces, white spaces, and so on. Okay, and this is called the DOM tree. Okay, Document Object Model Tree. This is done automatically by the browser. Okay. By the way, if it cannot parse the document because there are some issues, typically it doesn't say anything, okay? Try to parse as much as it can, okay? But, I mean, HTML5 says the document should be well-formed, well-nested, so there should be no problems in your application, okay? This more applies to older websites that maybe use some syntax that was not fully compatible with HTML5. Okay, so HTML contains head and body. What are they used for? Head contains metadata information. So it's typically something which is not shown in the main window. Like the page title, for instance. Page title is in the browser, in the window header. Like here you see, well, we have tabs now, right? So let's close everything and open a single window. Firefox, no, it still has tabs, but Polito.it. You see Politecnico di Torino here. That's a metadata. Okay, it's in the head section. While what you see here inside the main window, it's in the body section. Okay, very easy to understand. Yes. Now we need to go into a bit more details about HTML tags. Okay? HTML tags are used to define the meaning of a portion of a document. Okay? We call it semantic markup. Markup is just a way to say that we are using tags. Okay? Open and close tags to delimit area of the document that has a certain meaning. So, for instance, semantic HTML tags, title. I specify the title. Body. H1, header of level 1. H2, header of level 2. So a subheader and so on. Okay? Non-semantic, there are also non-semantic HTML which has no predefined meaning. Okay? We will go into more details later about this. Okay? So semantic means that we don't want to have tags in HTML that deals with the presentation issues. And unfortunately, this was not the case for older HTML versions. If you take HTML4 or even previous versions, there were tags like just to say, well, make the text bold, make the text italic, make the text bigger, and so on, okay? Which is actually not semantics. It's not about the content, it's about the presentation. So in recent, with the recent approaches like with HTML5, these presentation issues are delegated to CSS, which is another language that specifically deals with just presentation issues. Okay, so ideally no HTML code should deal with presentation issues. Okay, so categories of HTML elements, so these semantic tags that we can use. Well, you can define, of course, it's a document, so sections, headings, and so on. Phrasing means in the text you want to identify some parts to which maybe you want to apply some presentation, different presentation mode, okay? Or the flow, create two columns or whatever, what comes after, what comes before, and so on, okay? And here in the slide you will see many tags, and I try to highlight what are the most useful ones, okay? These are typical HTML5 tags: article, aside, nav for a navigation bar, section, header, footer, okay? Note that these are semantics. They don't imply a certain type of presentation. If you use it in modern browser without CSS and giving a presentation layout, basically they're just one before the other. They just mark sections that have a different semantic meaning. Okay, and then for the phrasing, as we say, the H1, H2, different headers, and so on. Okay? That's the usage guide. But I mean, this is semantic. It's just for you. Okay? The browser will not apply any presentation style. Of course, we know the title should be on the top, typically. Okay? The header should be on the top, the footer should be on the bottom. But I mean, this is just to mark a piece of HTML saying that it has a certain semantic meaning. Okay, so this is the conceptual layout, but if you copy-paste this and put it into a browser, it doesn't show this layout, just one after the other, okay? Because actually it all depends on the browser defaults, rules, which are typically very simple because nobody uses them, plus the CSS rules we are going to see later. Then, for the content, well, these are the most useful tags, the bold ones, P, paragraph. So, when you open a paragraph, you write something, you close the paragraph. It's like a text editor, right? OL or UL, so an ordered list, O means ordered, U means unordered, so not ordered list of items. Items are LI, list element, okay? And then there are other tags. Div is a bit special because there's no meaning, it's no default meaning. We can attach meanings using CSS classes and so on, okay? Phrasing content inline, we will see later on what's the difference between block and inline. But you already saw the A. It's very common. Since the first version of HTML, A was present because it's the anchor tag. It's the one that allows you to introduce the links, the elements that can be clicked in HTML. Okay? And as I told you, in older HTML, there was this text like B, bold, I, italic, emphasize, and so on, which are not used anymore and not to be used today. BR, break row, IMG, again, very interesting, very useful, it's present since the first version of HTML because it allows you to insert an image, okay? The simplest form of multimedia content inside an HTML page. It makes it a bit more fancy than just a page of text, okay? Span, again, is special, very special because it has no special meaning and we attach meaning using a CSS later. Interactive content, well, A is also interactive content, you can click on the link, right? But for instance, button, input, that implements all the most of the controls of a form, so the text boxes, the buttons as well, in addition to button, that you can use to interact with your web application. Select, text area, and so on, again, elements that can be used to interact with your web application. I mean, you just try to use them, you see them in the browser, and you immediately understand what they are, because you are using them every day, probably in web applications. Okay? Tables. Tables are very common because sometimes we need to organize the content in rows and columns, and table is the easiest way. Okay? So there's a specific tag, table, with header, body, table row, table D. D means data, so a single cell, table header, and so on. Okay? May have caption and so on. There's a lot of tags specific to tables. But I mean, you just try to use them, you see, and you look at an example when you need something, like you want to have a cell that spans multiple rows and so on. Just look in the internet. I mean, it's very simple, just attributes and so on. I mean, I don't think we need to spend time on this. HTML elements can have attributes. We already saw one, like href for the anchor tags, for the links. So just a name equal to a value, typically in quotation marks. In well-formatted HTML, we always use the quotation marks. Like we saw A, href, and so on, but input type text, input type number, and so on. Okay? It depends on the tag. The HTML5 specification, but also the older specification says which attributes are valid for each HTML tag. Okay? Oops. Okay. And then there are attributes which are valid with any HTML tag. And nowadays in HTML5 there are, I think, 3 important attributes we need to know. One is class, the other is ID, and the third is style. Okay? Class is a set of class identifiers that we don't yet know what they are, but they come from the CSS, so next 1 hour and a half. So, in short, they apply a certain presentation style to the tag and to the children if needed. Okay? ID with a unique value is not shown in the interface, but it can be useful when programming the behavior of the page, because if we use, as it is required, a unique ID, so, I don't know, first button, say, confirm button, and whatever, we can easily get a reference to this element from the code, from the JavaScript code, or also from CSS and so on, but especially from the JavaScript code, to attach behaviors to this element. Okay? Like a button, for instance, and it's easy. You get the element in the page with this ID, and then attach this function and so on. Okay? Instead of navigating the tree, navigating complex data structure is always complex. If we have pointers like these unique IDs, it's much easier to go inside the HTML and implement our functionalities. And then there is this style attribute, which I invite you not to overuse it, okay? Because it's something that allows you to put some CSS code, that is the stuff we are going to see later, directly inside HTML. But since we said we want to keep things separate, just use it as less, I'm not sure if you can say it, and try to avoid it as much as possible, okay? Because we are mixing things together, presentation with content, okay? It's not forbidden. If you want to have a quick test to see how a CSS rule works and so on, okay, try use it. If there is something very small, very specific, just maybe for testing or also in production, but very limited and so on, maybe you don't want to change all your CSS or your system, to add rules because it's more complex. Just modify a little bit the HTML using the style attribute. That can be acceptable. But in general, try to avoid it. Okay? Use sparingly, as they say on the slides. And then we have a couple of wildcard elements. So we finished the discussion about the attributes. Okay, so we are back to the HTML tags, div and span that can include sub-elements inside. Okay, the difference between the two is that one is block level, so it's a block of elements that is shown as a rectangle by default inside the browser window, while span is a block of, it's a set of elements that is shown left to right, right, inline. But we are going to see what this inline and block means better later with the CSS, okay? So it does not start a new line, occupy only the necessary space, while the first is full width. Basically, it's a box, a virtual box created inside the browser window, okay? No predefined semantic for both of them, invisible layout, but they are elements in which we can put for instance, the previous attributes, class or IDs, and then can easily isolate sub-trees inside the DOM tree of the HTML in the browser. Okay? So that's why they are useful, because we want to mark a subsection, but we don't want this subsection to appear in some form inside the browser, the browser window. We just use this invisible text, we add attributes, class ID, and so on, and we have immediately a reference or a way to address all the elements inside the block. Okay, opaque semantic element. Okay, you see on the left what was done before HTML5. So basically it was a lot of div with class, and the class basically defined the behavior and the semantic as well, okay? At least at a logical level. Nowadays we have spatial text. For the exam, up to you. I mean, I don't really care if it's a section header, nav, div, or it's all div. I mean, as long as you have a reasonable organization of the text, for us is fine, okay? So, almost done, and then after the break we will have an example. Which tag you should use? Maybe these flowcharts could help, okay? Is it a major navigation block? Yes, probably it's an bar, okay? Does it make sense on its own? It's an article, so it means a block of text, okay? Required to understand the current content, no aside, so like a sidebar. Could you move it to an appendix figure? That's interesting. It is logical to add a heading section, okay, and a semantic, the appropriate element, paragraph, etc. Otherwise, div. Okay. Beautiful HTML. You don't see it here, but I think you can zoom in here. But I mean, just no, you can zoom in too much. I mean, we are not again focusing too much on this. Just be aware of the fact that HTML5 was designed to give you the possibility to describe your content in terms of semantic, okay? And last slide, you can also validate the HTML you write with the validator, okay? I think there can be some standalone program, maybe even Node packages. But I mean, the easiest thing is copy-pasting your HTML to this validator. This validator gives you a lot of indications about if you did something which is not permitted in HTML5 or not, or maybe you have even worse, some issues with the text. You open a tag, you didn't close the tag, and so on. But I must tell you, nowadays, I mean, this development environment are so good, okay, that helps you quite a lot in these things, okay? So you probably don't need to use this validator unless you want to have a check and make sure everything is working and so on, or you can even run validator on third-party websites and so on, okay? Probably if you validate most of the websites around, it says something that doesn't, I mean, the validator says something that could be improved, like HTTPS polito.it, okay? Just, you see how many things there are. But I mean, as long as there are no big errors, as we expect in websites that work, okay, like the websites for the exam and so on, we don't really care too much. We want you to know that this validator exists, okay? But I mean, browsers are quite tolerant when parsing HTML, okay? Even in HTML5 documents, okay? But I mean, try to write well-formed HTML. It's even better for you because it's easier to maintain, it's easier to modify, and you are sure that any browser parses it correctly. Okay? So I will stop here because it's 10 o'clock, so we have 10 minutes break as usual. And then I will show you the basic HTML document we already have in the directory for this week. We talk about CSS, and then we play a little bit to improve the website. It will be the basic structure of the front end of our application that we carry on during the lectures. Okay? Okay. Any questions? Seems not, so thank you.